finality to the polling prognostications of Democrats' doom. It's still going to be race by race. And joining me now, Christina Bellantoni, editor-in-chief of Roll Call, and McKay Coppins, senior political writer for BuzzFeed. And I will start here at the table with you, McKay, just on this question. So Democrats overall were sort of seen as just doomed. Like, it's just over. We shouldn't even have an election. But then you started to see other polling, individual polls in some of these southern races, as well as some really interesting stuff that's being done in the New Republic and others, where they're actually taking a look individually at the states and saying, well, you know what, Democrats may not be in catastrophically bad shape.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the problem with creating these narratives so early on. I think it started when Nate Silver came out with his prediction, right? And obviously polls change, races go up and down. I think what's most interesting is that this is happening in the South, which Republicans forever have considered their one remaining stronghold, right? Even when Democrats would daydream about a future Republican Party that would shrink to just a regional strength, it was always in the South. It was always in the Southeast. And now we're seeing a lot of evidence that maybe they're going to have to fight for their power there, too.
And Christina, so what do you think is behind that? You know, why would a Mark Pryor, he's leading pretty substantially against Tom Cotton, if we look at the polling, at least our NBC Marist polling, showing him in pretty good shape in a state like Arkansas that, you know, people saw as sort of a giveaway. Democrats couldn't win it. You see Mark Begich not done yet in Atlanta. You see Allison Lundergan Grimes doing better than expected in a state like Kentucky. What do you think is behind Democrats' sort of revival, I guess you could say, in these southern states?
There are a couple of dynamics at work. You know, I'll separate a few. You mentioned Mark Begich in Alaska. Roll Call actually is going to have a story later this afternoon looking at something that could actually boost his hopes in November. That's a pretty good story up. Trigstad that's going to look at that issue. But we also have the dynamic where when you have two candidates, it's much easier for voters to make a choice and people start to make up their minds. So we're waiting for primary results in a lot of cases. Mitch McConnell is probably going to do just fine on May 20th and get rid of his Tea Party challenger. And so then voters will really start to focus, and some of those Republicans that are split in a Republican-dominated state like Kentucky are going to start coming back into the fold. Michelle Nunn, we don't know who she's going to run against right now. National Republicans have their favorite, Tea Party Republicans have their favorites, and it's a very split Republican primary heading there. So once you start to see that condense, then you start to see poll numbers shift. But what's really interesting when it comes to people like Pryor is power, right? You know, he's got a lot of seniority. He's got issues that he's able to advance back home. He brought the president to his home state last week to talk about tornadoes and the relief funding for that. And this is an area where he's really able to push and say, I am paying attention to what's going on back home. This is the most important thing to me. I'm not necessarily a creature of Washington, but I can benefit from having all of the power that comes with being in the majority in the Senate. Right. So those are all playing.
And I mean, isn't that partly the thing, McKay, it's incumbency, right? The same thing that could ultimately save Mitch McConnell could also ultimately save Mark Pryor. That if you're in office, the odds of taking you out of office are actually less than may appear based on the zeitgeist in the early polls.
Right. I think that's the thing. Since 2010, we've arrived at this moment in politics where we assume that incumbency is actually detrimental to candidates because there were so many incumbents that were tossed out. That was a particular moment in politics. Right. To make that last forever, for the infinite future, a lot of things would have to structurally change about American politics that we haven't seen change yet. So being an incumbent is still a huge advantage, and that's why we'll probably, or there's still a very good chance that we'll see all these Republican incumbents pull off victories.
Yeah, I mean, you have an infrastructure, you have, you know, so much going for you as an incumbent. But I'm wondering, Christina, other sort of X factor here might in a weird way be the Affordable Care Act. You do now see a tremendous pushback and energy among Democrats around this idea, particularly of the Medicaid expansion in the states where it's not happening. And even in a state where it is, where you would think that the Affordable Care Act would be a running issue for Republicans, take a look at this in Kentucky. In Kentucky, Obamacare, very low favorables. It is 33% favorable, whereas Connect is a little bit better off, where people actually prefer Connect to Obamacare, even though they are the self-same thing. Do you have the possibility in some states where the Affordable Care Act ends up being a motivating issue in a sense for Democrats?
Maybe. And one thing you can see in North Carolina, there actually were higher than average signups there, even though there was not a lot of help from the state legislator there and obviously the governor, who is a Republican. So the other issue is that it's not necessarily Democrats really excited about the Affordable Care Act, but Republicans are less excited about it because it seems to be going smoothly. The White House took this victory lap. There's a lot we still don't know about some of the signups and costs and how much people are going to pay into the program and all of that. But I've talked to several Republican consultants who've told me they're really concerned if they don't have Obamacare as a rallying issue for the base, they need people to be angry at something to show up. Well, that's one reason why you're seeing the special committee investigating what happened in Benghazi, because this is something that excites the base, it gets people paying attention and angry at the White House, which then the Republicans believe translates to being angry at the Democrats.
And angry at the president, right, specifically McKay. But can you carry that all the way from May to November? The Affordable Care Act obviously dissipating as an issue. At the same time, things like not expanding Medicaid is actually rising as a motivating issue for Democrats. I'm thinking North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at 2006, Democrats rode the wave of unpopularity for the incumbent president at that time by using a bunch of different issues, primarily Iraq, but there were a bunch of issues, right? And so I think that the Republicans I talked to say, just be about Obamacare. Obamacare is going to be part of the strategy, but it can't just be that. Benghazi is going to be part of it. You know, even the economy in a lot of these states is not great, and the president in these southern states still has very low approval ratings, and so they'll find ways to remind voters that they don't like the president, but it can't just be one issue.
Right, indeed. Okay, McKay, Coppins, Christina Bellantoni are going to hang out with us, stay with us, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Republicans now. Rand Paul's latest moves and how they're already showing his 2016 strategy. We'll be right back.